Brothers and sisters, I am honored to have the privilege to worship with you. Last year, I taught at Duke, and the route was right past here, and every time I went by, I wondered, who's worshiping in this Community United Church of Christ? And now, it is my privilege to be a fellow worshiper with you. I suspect as I go back from Raleigh to Durham, I'll always see the sign. At least you do a good job of advertising who you are. I am delighted that friends of mine dropped my name. June Wink, the wife of former late Walter Wink, and Edie Bojan. Jim Smith got the word, and so here I am. I'd like to take the privilege to show that even though I have moved from New York, and I'm no longer the pastor of Riverside Church, when I was pastor of Riverside Church, I was Mr. Who's Who. Now that I've moved to Raleigh, I'm Who's He? But anyway, to show that I'm somebody, I'd like to ask those persons who accepted my invitation to come to help me preach today to please stand so you can see, hey, I've got some influence in this town. Thank you. Before I get started, and they tell me that normally I should have about, maybe 20 minutes for my sermon. So I think I'll try to fit within that range. There are several things I want to do. And if my voice does not carry well, that's okay. You'll get the gesture. I'm delighted to have with me today my wife, Betty. And over the years, we've developed what I call the Betty Forbes ministry. It was really started actually at our 50th wedding anniversary. At that time, the leader, Harville Hendricks, who used to be on Oprah's show, wrote a book entitled On Getting the Love You Want, said that to have a good, strong relationship, you need to continue to be exuberant about your mate, even after you've been together for a long time. And so they taught us to do this, to get excited about the fact that I'm married to this woman for 50 years. Well, by now, we've been married for 55 years. And I would like to ask Betty to come forward so that we can have the Betty Forbes ministry. So what I'd like to ask is all couples that are present today to please stand. And I'm aware that when I say couples, I include a multiplicity of varieties of connections, so that's fine. So here's what I'd like for you to do. If you kind of are not beside your mate, you can just get eye contact. Get eye contact with your mate and repeat these words which I say to Betty. And you could, if you want to make it more intimate, you could hold the hand of your mate if you're that close. Otherwise, it does have to be eye contact. But this is what I say to Betty. You're the cream in my coffee. Say that. You're the cream in my coffee. Sugar in my tea. Sugar in my tea. Honey on my biscuit. Honey on my biscuit. And the only fish in my sea. You may be seated. I would like to also say to have a welcome that just names all of the different categories that have tended to bring fragmentation and alienation, but to say in this place, you are welcome, that was so important. And it reminded me of a song that Betty and I sing from time to time. So we're going to teach it to you. I think you're going to like it. Would you just go over there? Right there. The words of the song are, we are one in your spirit. We are one in your love. Deep within, all around, below and above. There's no one thing that's excluded from your care. Thy will be done. I'll sing it first, and then I'll ask you to join me. We are one in your spirit. We are one in your deep within, all around, below and above. There's no one anywhere that's excluded from your care. Come sing with me. We are one in your spirit. We are one in your love. Deep within, all around, below. There's no one anywhere that's excluded from your Since I'm not pastoring anymore, I must confess that I do not keep up with the lectionary readings. So I had to call the church. What are the readings for this Sunday? I was surprised when they mentioned not only Amos, but the parable of the Good Samaritan. So I had to go to Shaw University where I can use their library. I could also use Meredith too if I wanted to lend it. What was Jesus getting at? What was his concern? What was the intent in sharing the story of the Good Samaritan? After my research, did a little work in the homiletical workshop, I've come up with this title, An Invitation to Live by the Platinum Rule. Now everybody knows the golden rule. As you would others do to you, do also unto them, we know that. But this one is the platinum rule. The first time I mentioned it as the platinum rule was at the funeral of David Rockefeller when I was pastoring at Riverside Church. And I learned that John D. Rockefeller Jr. was a very religious guy. He was Baptist. He actually made sure that his sons had Bible study every day. John D. Rockefeller Jr. And that one of the passages that he drilled in them was, thou shalt love the Lord thy God with all thy heart, all thy soul, all thy strength, and all thy mind, and thy neighbor as thyself. And from my experience with Mr. Rockefeller, he was not a perfect man by most people's assessment. Robber baron was still lingering somewhere in the back. But the brother, so far as I could tell, tried his best to live by that rule. Thou shalt love the Lord thy God with all thy heart, all thy mind, all thy soul, all thy strength, and thy neighbor as thyself. So, the eulogy was why David Rockefeller was a great man. And I would say basically he tried to live by the great commandment as best he could. Not always making it, but he tried. Today, I want to talk to you about the platinum rule. Not the golden rule. I know you're doing that. I know you treat each other just like you'd like to be treated. This one is a little harder. This is the platinum rule. Means that you got to love yourself, got to love your neighbor, got to love God, probably in a reverse order. Loving God is more likely to make you love your neighbor and also capable of loving yourself.
Amen.
So, here's the setting. I think it was a social gathering. Someone had set a dinner for the new rabbi in town. The reason I say that is they probably were seated as they did around tables when they were in social arrangements. But then it says, then a lawyer stood up. So that's why I think it was a nice social gathering to get the chance to meet this new rabbi in town. What is he all about? The rabbi was questioned by a lawyer. A lawyer may not be exactly it. An expert in the law is the way Barclay says it. You know, somebody who was really steeped in Torah, knew the ins and outs of it. That person stood up, and they said to test Jesus, I always thought sort of a negative assault. No, not necessarily so, but there was a sort of litmus test about who's really acceptable. What's his attitude about Torah? Is he coming to put the law aside? So to test him, just to hear him out. No, to smoke him out as to what does this guy believe. So, when he stands and asks, sir, what might I do to enter into eternal life? To live the good life? It's a standard question. It's a test question. And Jesus says, well, you know the law. And what does it say? And the brother said, you shall love the Lord thy God. This is the platinum rule I'm getting ready to explain to you. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, all your soul, all your strength, and all your mind, and your neighbor as you love yourself. Jesus says, that's good. That's good. That's it. You hit it right on the head. If you do that, then you shall have the good life. You shall live the abundant life. You shall live well on earth and be assured of a place in eternity. So, I think that the story he tells is in response to the lawyer's effort. You see, what Jesus did, while the guy started asking him a question, Jesus asked him a question, and the answer he gave caused him to cross-examine himself. Have I lived up to this? Would I make an A on this case? Have I been living by the standard of the plumb line that Amos talked about? And then he thought, well, maybe if I have any shortcoming, it would be in relationship to neighbor. So the Jewish community tended to think of neighbors as themselves and not the Gentiles. It surely would not be as inclusive as the welcome that you gave me today. Everybody, all these categories are welcome in this place. So he wanted to justify himself or put himself in the right or excuse himself if he had not been completely perfect in this matter. He said, well, who is my neighbor? It was that gave rise to the telling of the story. So you must always understand this. When you hear the story of the parable of the prodigal, not of the Good Samaritan, you must always understand Jesus told the story not to have a judgment against the lawyer, not to put him in his place. I think, and you can decide for yourself, I think the reason Jesus told that story was to invite that lawyer, that scribe, that expert in the law, to invite him beyond just knowing it. That is what the platinum rule was. To invite him beyond carrying it in a phylactery every day, everywhere he went. It's not enough to know it. It's not enough to quote it. It's not enough to give it as the answer to the question about how do you get the eternal life. It's doing it. There it is. That's it. See, you can know it by heart. You can quote it, like that, in Hebrew or in Aramaic or whatever language. But the issue is, do we do it? Jesus' reason for telling this story is actually to invite this scribe, this expert in the law, to live by the platinum rule. Let me say a little bit about the platinum rule. The story that is told gives mostly what you need to know, because here is this man who has been sort of attacked on the road, robbed, left half dead. And according to the story that Jesus tells, to recruit them, to really pull them into living by this platinum rule, the rabbi passes by on the other side. Levite passes close, but then quickly away. And then a Samaritan. I told Jim that my other topic was going to be God's least likely hero of the year. A Samaritan? I mean, if you knew the attitude that Jews had towards Samaritans, I mean, the people must have been shocked when Jesus gives the Samaritan as the hero of the story. The ne'er-do-wells, the half-breeds that they were, folks that didn't worship in the right way, people that often were unkind to Jesus, would not even allow his disciples to arrange accommodation on the way to the high holy days. A Samaritan? Really, if you really wanted to get the story, you'd have to say it was a story where white folks would hear that Negroes were the heroes, or where people would hear that that gays were the heroes, or that if they were Democrats, they say Republicans were the heroes. In other words, whatever category you think, oh no, then this is what the story is about. The oh no person becomes the one that God has recruited to be one living by the platinum rule. And the platinum rule is this Samaritan, I don't know anything about his religion. I believe he loved the Lord. And I think that love of God had generated compassion in him. And in addition to compassion in him, his compassion began to be like Father Divine in New York, who said that some of these preachers around here are just preaching the gospel. My job is to tangibilitate the gospel. Now that's the platinum rule. It's when you tangibilitate it, when you put it in action, not just quoting it, reciting it, but when you are doing it, when you are living according to that standard.
Amen.
Oh, brothers and sisters, today I ask you to ponder I have a doctor in New York who called me last week. It was so strange. That was before I knew that this was the lectionary reading. And he said, look, Forbes, he says, I heard what Bishop Curry said at your Juneteenth event at Carnegie Hall. Bishop Curry has said, listen, folks, if you all are Democrats in here, you better go out and find yourself a Republican to become friends with, because this business of alienation and separation and fragmentation has to come to an end. Amen. But Dr. Braverman said, if you understood how Jews feel about Samaritans in Jesus' day, you'd understand that maybe the parallel for our day is, suppose we had, and this is what he said to me, suppose we had not only Good Samaritan Hospital, but Ku Klux Klan Hospital. That would parallel this feeling. Well, I tell you, as I look, my time is just about up. Why don't I just say, do you get it? If you get it, if you get it, I'll tell you a couple of examples that will really make it contemporary, and then we can make sure that the chicken does not burn on the rotisserie. That way. Just a few illustrations. One is from Howard Thurman, Daytona Beach, in the time when he was with his grandmother. They lived close together. Black folk and white folk lived kind of close together. Next door neighbor was Mrs. Jefferson. Mrs. Jefferson was not a very kind white woman. She was very mean. She had a chicken coop right next to the fence. Ever so often, she'd clean it out by throwing the manure over the fence at Mrs. Thurman's yard. In the course of time, Mrs. Jefferson fell ill. I'm talking about platinum rule kind of stuff. Fell ill, and Mrs. Thurman, in spite of the unkindness of Mrs. Jefferson, heard she was ill, had been ill, got some soup together and some beautiful flowers. And she took it over to Mrs. Jefferson. And Mrs. Jefferson said, oh, Mrs. Thurman, this is the best soup I've ever tasted. And then she looked at the flowers and she said, oh, those are the most beautiful flowers I've ever seen. Where'd you get them from? She said, right next to the fence. Oh, there's another one too, about a slave during the Civil War. He was taken along with his master to the battle, take care of his needs. In hand-to-hand combat, his master had been struck down and left, and he risked, this slave risked his life going down near the battlefield, picked up his slave master and pulled him to safety, and then took his horse and rode off behind the Union Army. Oh, y'all, that's funny. That's funny. You must love your neighbor, but you got to love yourself. So, really. Just why don't I tell this woman in Kentucky, her daughter had had an accident. Her daughter had she had consented that her heart could be given as a donor. And the mother found out who had received her daughter's heart. And she requested opportunity to visit that person. It was a black man She visited his room. And she took her ear and put it on the chest of this black man, simply saying, I just want to hear the beating of my daughter's heart. Oh, well, the best thing. Why don't you just let me in by saying, how many of you saw the movie, The Best of Enemies? If you haven't seen it, the reason you got to see it, it's about Raleigh and Durham. You got to see it. Why? Because it's a movie that talks about when Durham had the crisis with respect to school integration. Right. That a professor from Shaw University was brought over to kind of set up a process by which, a charrette, by which they could work through it. And what happened was, and this is so real, it's real for me. I did the commencement address the last year that Hillside was a black high school in Durham. So it's kind of real for me. This Ann Atwater helped to organize the group of black people insisting first on appropriate conditions for housing, and then when the school burned, to make sure that their kids could go to another school. They worked this thing so until C.P. Ellis, who was the head of the Klan, the Ku Klux Klan, represented them in the big meetings. And they were enemies. They didn't even want to speak to each other. They didn't even want to sit with each other. But according to the movie, in the course of time, what happened to that man who was in Jesus' presence happened to C.P. Ellis. Oh, brothers and sisters, let me just come on down and end this thing closer to you. I know you're trying to capture what I'm saying, but I'm going to come on down because let me tell you what happened. That in the course of time, the Lord began to work on that brother, even though he's the head of the Klan. And when they were voting whether or not they were going to have integration in that city, that brother, C.P. Ellis, took his card, his Klan card out, and showed it to the people, then tore it up in their presence and says, I don't need this anymore. And he voted yes for integration. This man was an enemy to Ann Atwater. But the Holy Spirit, God's power, God's love, amen, did something to him to help invite him to live by the platinum rule. Amen. And as a result of that, they were able to integrate the schools in Durham County. And Ann Atwater and C.P. Ellis traveled all over the United States talking about how they had discovered that they were neighbors indeed. Amen. Well, amen, I want to close by asking you a question. Listen, folks, I know this church. You know, the other Sunday I went to Pullen. It has a reputation for being progressive. You all have a reputation for being open, just wide open. So open until folks wonder how you hold it together. But that's all right. That's all right. You have that. I want to know, are you willing to live by the platinum rule? To love God with all your heart and mind and soul and strength? To love your neighbor with a sense of deep care? And to love yourself? If you're willing to do that, then you are ready to live by the platinum rule. I do the golden rule. I've been doing that a long time. I'm moving up now. I'm moving up to the platinum rule. And if you can do that, then you'll be able to help sing this song that I sing. And I'm going to give you a little action, and then I'll be through because it's 11:30 now. So anyway, so for this one, I have written this song. Rose used to sing some of my songs, so this one I've written. And it goes like this. The song I'm singing is for my special friend, for the one who gave me life, this season I raise. From the bottom of my heart, I am lifting up my voice to sing to God a melody of praise. Dear Lord, my God, you've been so good to me. You've made me in your image, and then you set my spirit free. You've always seen more good in me than I have been aware. When down and out and filled with doubt, you're the answer to my prayer. Alpha and Omega, you're the one who makes me whole. My all-sufficient comforter, you're the keeper of my soul. Mighty rock of ages, you always see me through. That's why I dedicate this song to the one and only you. I praise you in the morning. I praise you all day long. And even when I go to sleep, my heart keeps singing this song. I praise you when everything's all right. When in trouble, this is my vow. No matter how bleak my circumstance, I'm going to praise you anyhow. And then, this is the part. Please stand. I want you to do this part. I say, in the way that I walk, in the way that I talk, in the way that I think, and in the way that I pray. In everything I do, I want to honor you by the way I live each day. Now, if you want to live by a platinum rule, then in the way that I walk, in the way that I talk, in the way that I think, and in the way that I pray. In everything I do, I want to honor you by the way I live each day. One more time. In the way that I walk, in the way that I talk, in the way that I think, and in the way that I pray. In everything